Hello, and welcome to the fifth and final part of our series looking at the life of David and, more importantly, his relationship with God. Today we're reminded, if indeed you need reminding, that life rarely goes as anticipated. I don't know if you've experienced that, or maybe you have the Midas touch and everything you do and say goes exactly to plan and all your dreams do come true. Well, for me and many others, the reality is that plans fails and dreams don't come true. It's great to have hopes, plans and dreams, but reality is a greater place to live. There are those times in our lives when we come to the place of accepting that our dreams won't come true. Worse than that, it means that some of our dreams can't come true. That the two of you, as it seems, turns out may not live happily ever after. That you may not ever get the opportunity to walk a daughter down the aisle. That prodigal son or that prodigal daughter looks like they may not be coming home. You're not getting into that university, or he's going to marry her anyway. It looks like money may always be tight. It looks like the dream job isn't going to be the dream job after all. You understand what I'm talking about, I'm sure. And the thing is, as we experience more of life, we realise that sometimes our dreams begin to crumble and things aren't going in the direction that we thought that they would. And there's this internal sense of panic and this internal sense of anger because after all, God, the universe, life promised you, right? Maybe you have this sense that you are owed because you played by the rules. You did everything right. You raised them right. You behaved. You waited. Isn't there a cause and effect? Isn't there sowing and reaping? And we want to know why our dreams aren't coming true. And in some cases, it looks like they can't come true. In fact, it looks like everybody else's dreams are coming true, but yours. And at times, it looks like God has granted somebody else your wish. So today, as we wrap up this series, looking at the life of David, we're asking the question, what do we do when our dreams can't come true? Now, as we saw a few weeks ago when David was in his 20s, and thanks to the behaviour and the decisions of King Saul, David realises that some of his dreams weren't going to come true. God had made David some very, very specific promises, but crazy King Saul decided that David needed to die, and consequently, David finds himself on the run in the wilderness and everything's upside down. And he did what many of us do when we realise our dreams can't come true. He panicked. And when he panicked, he made bad decision after bad decision and people died. But during that season of his life, he learned a very important lesson, which was to trust on God's timing and not his own. Now as king, it would be himself that would undermine his own dreams coming true. And the lesson that he learned in that season of his life is a lesson for all of us. Last week we left off with David becoming king, and now this is about 22 years later, and he's in his 50s, and he's no longer the cool kid who killed Goliath. Today, being in your 50s is pretty good age to be, and I can vouch for that. But in the ancient times, 50s was old. You probably lost most of your teeth, you were not young, and you weren't handsome, and you probably smelled bad. So he's not cool King David. Now he's King David in his 50s. And he sends his men off to war. We don't know why he didn't go. Maybe because of how old he was at that particular point. And at one night, he's at home. And he goes onto the balcony of his house. And now what is a famous story unfolds. He looks down and he sees Uriah's wife bathing. And her name is Bathsheba. Uriah is one of his generals in his army. And he is away with the men at war. And he calls a servant over and he says, "Who's that?" And the servant says, "That is Uriah the Hittite's wife," i.e. she's married. And David says, "Send her to me." Now, as we know from the beginning of this series, God had warned Israel, don't have a king, because when you have a king, there are problems that come with having a king. And one of the problems of having a king is that no one can tell the king no. You can tell the priest no, you can tell a prophet no, you can tell a judge no, but you can't say no to the king. So Bathsheba comes up to David, they spend the night together, and they probably spend multiple nights together, and eventually she sends a message to him, "I'm pregnant." David believes that he can fix this and calls for her husband to come in off the battlefield to give him a report of what's going on, because he's then bound to go and visit his wife. But then David learns that he didn't go home to be with his wife as David had hoped. And David asks him, Why don't you go home to your wife, he says. And Uriah says, how can I spend the night with my wife when my men are dying and being slaughtered in the mud? And David goes, spend one more night. And David gets him drunk and then he points him towards home. The next morning David gets up and Uriah still hasn't gone home because Uriah isn't going to spend a night in luxury when his men are dying on the battlefield. He's a good man. So David writes a message to Joab, Uriah's commander, and he says, Dear Joab, put Uriah in the fiercest part of the battle, and when things get really hot, withdraw from him and his bodyguard. It was a death sentence. He signs it, seals it, and gives it to Uriah, who gives it to Joab, and Joab does as the king says, because you can't say no to the king. And Uriah dies in battle. Bathsheba mourns and David brings her into her home and hoping that it looks like to the world that David, the magnanimous, wonderful man, is going to raise somebody else's child. And he marries Bathsheba and everything's good and David has managed the outcome, right? Except that this was no secret. In a world where there are slaves everywhere, everyone knew the true story. And so eventually, after they're married, the prophet Nathan makes an appointment with David. And he comes in to see him and he tells him this fictitious story. And David gets really mad at one of the guys in the story. And Nathan says, hey, by the way, David, you're the guy you're so mad about in the story. Boom. And David breaks. And he allows the law of God to speak to his heart. The bad decisions that we make will bring with it a consequence. Maybe not straight away, but sometime down the line. And that day, as David began to mourn his sin, Nathan said this to him. And you can read the full account in 2 Samuel 12 and later on in the chapters. This is what the Lord says. Out of your own household, I am going to bring calamity on you. What you did in secret, the calamity coming to you will be in broad daylight before all of Israel, because you're the leader. You are accountable to the entire kingdom because you're the king. You're accountable to the entire kingdom, and I'm going to bring about a consequence that everybody in the kingdom knows about it. And then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And he takes full responsibility. Even though David was king and even though he was flawed, he never confused himself with the king of Israel. He never abandoned God's law. He broke it, but then he would allow God's law to break him. And Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die, but there is going to be an unavoidable consequence for what you did. You had someone who is innocent murdered, and you tried to hide it, and you tried to lie to the entire nation. So a year goes by and nothing happens. 2 years go by and nothing happens. 5 years go by, nothing happens. And finally, 10 years later, this consequence takes hold and it turns David's world upside down. And the dreams that he had can't come true. David's oldest son was a young guy named Amnon. And Amnon, because he was the oldest son, was in line to become the next king of Israel. But Amnon was consumed with lust for his half-sister Tamar. He does everything he can to try and get her attention, and when none of it works, he pretends to be very, very ill, and eventually he sends a message to his dad David, and he says, Dad, is it okay if my sister Tamar prepares a special meal for me? And David agrees, and then it's just the two of them. And Amnon tries to talk her into going to bed with him and admits he isn't really ill, he just wanted to be alone with her. And Tamar resists and says, absolutely not, we're related. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. But the text says, but he refused to listen, and since he was stronger, he raped her. And then this next verse, it just is gut-wrenching. But again, the biographers, the people who bring us these stories, they don't skip any of the details. And the text says this, then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Amnon said to her, get up and get out. Well, she's devastated. She knows that her life is ruined forever. She, in this culture, will never marry. And there are no secrets in the palace. In fact, there are no secrets to the degree that David finds out. And when King David finds out what his oldest son did to one of his daughters, he's furious. And do you know what he did? Nothing. He did nothing. And sometimes doing and saying nothing can also bring about calamity. Maybe David felt he had lost his moral authority. But now we're introduced to another one of David's sons, and his name is Absalom. And we're led to believe that he is next in line to be the king after Amnon. Absalom is Tamar's brother by the same two parents, and Absalom takes Tamar into his home, and he too does nothing. And he never speaks to Amnon, he just acts as if he doesn't even exist. And a year goes by and nothing. And then 2 years go by. And when he thinks that everybody has forgotten what happened, he throws a big feast at his home. And he invites the entire family round. But David chooses not to go. So Absalom has this big feast and he gets everybody good and drunk. And when Amnon is really, really drunk and all the brothers and families are gathered around these tables, he sends his men into the dining hall and they slaughter Amnon in front of all the brothers. And the brothers get up and they flee to Jerusalem. And Absalom gets up and he flees north to what we would call Syria now. And then when King David finds out that his oldest son has been murdered by what we then find out, his favourite son, King David does nothing. And life just goes on. 3 long years go by. And perhaps people have forgotten, life's gone back to normal. And so David invites Absalom back to Jerusalem, back to the capital. And when Absalom gets there, he's told, you're invited to move back into your home, but the king refuses to see you. And so Absalom, for the next 2 years, tries to get in to see King David, and King David ignores him. And Absalom is so furious. You brought me back here. It's like I'm under house arrest. My family won't speak to me. And then he gets angrier and angrier and angrier. And finally, he was just fed up. So he sends his servants to Joab's farm. Now, Joab is the commander of all of David's armies, and he was the go-between to get a message to the king. And Joab won't have anything to do with Absalom either. And so Absalom sends his servants to Joab's farm and he burns down the entire farm. And Joab comes over to Absalom's house finally and he says, what are you up to? And Absalom says, well, it's nice to finally see you, Joab. I've been trying to get a message to you and to my father for 2 years and you've ignored me. So now that I have your undivided attention, because I burnt down your farm, would you please tell my father I want to see him? And Joab agrees. Joab's smart and he knows that you can't just approach David directly. So he sends a woman in. And this woman makes up this incredible story, gets David all engaged emotionally in the story. And David gets frustrated, one of the characters. Does that sound familiar? And then at the end of the story, she says, well, my king, that's you. You're upset with yourself. And he pauses and he said, did Joab send you? And she says, yes. And David then calls for Joab and Joab says, King, your highness, please see your son Absalom. He's waited for 2 years. And so eventually Absalom comes in before the king and he bows down and David lays his hands on Absalom. And it was his way of saying, you're forgiven and our relationship is restored. Only it's not. Absalom is hurt and David never calls for him ever again from what we can see. Absalom gets so angry and hurt and he decides to overthrow his father and to take the kingdom and to take the throne himself. Perhaps he thought, well, it's mine eventually anyway, I'm just going to take it now. And he has a plan, and every morning Absalom would get up early and set up a table at the entrance to the city, and anyone who was coming to the city to try to get to see David, to get justice for some cause, Absalom would say, well, let me help you. And he did. So instead of waiting weeks to see the king, he would deal with it there and then. And the text tells us that Absalom stole the hearts of the people. And for 4 years he sat outside the gates of the city and would talk to anyone and any case. And then he sets in motion his plot to overthrow his father. Then Absalom, the text tells us, sent secret messages throughout the tribes of Israel to say, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, go into the city and say, Absalom is king. So he sent all these messengers out into the primary cities and he said, on a certain time, on a certain day, you're all going to run through the city and just announce, Absalom is king. Absalom is king. Now there's no newspapers, there's no radio, there's no quick communication. So people basically believed whatever they heard. And maybe Absalom is king because David died. Maybe Absalom is king because David just abdicated and decided to let Absalom be king. We don't know. but he had the hearts of the people. So when people heard that Absalom had become king, they rejoiced all over the kingdom, even though it hadn't actually happened. Now, it's been 16 years since David's incident with Bathsheba, and now David's world is upside down. His firstborn has been murdered by his favourite son, who has now instigated a civil war and is about to divide the entire nation. A messenger arrives to see David and tells him what has happened, and he's not surprised. Perhaps he's heard rumours of this for the past couple of years, and the text then says that David said to all of his family and officials, "Come, we must flee the city, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave here immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin on us, and he will put this entire city to the sword." David knew that anyone who stood with him, Absalom would kill. So David abandons the throne to save the city, and once again, remember, once again he's a fugitive, for he finds himself running from the place that he considered his home, running from the people who supposedly loved him. And once again he's a fugitive, but this time he's not 22, this time he's 61 years old. This was not the dream. This was not supposed to happen. This was not the way he was supposed to spend this season of his life. This was not what he expected. His dreams were not coming true, and as it turned out, they could not come true. And this is where, once again, our lives at some point in the past, now or in the future, intersect with the story of David. David, though he was king, is no stranger to being heartbroken, disappointed, angry and frustrated with God. But this isn't the first time David had faced a situation like this. And David remembered that he needs to trust God. And he takes all of his family and anyone who's supporting him, and they get out of Jerusalem before Absalom and his men and his followers get there. The whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by. The king also crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people moved on towards the wilderness. David isn't even sure where they're going at this point. He just knows they all need to go, and quickly. Zadok, who is the high priest, was there too, leaving the city with David and all of the Levites, and they were carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God. The Ark of the Covenant of God represented the presence of God for ancient Israel. You could not be closer to God as far as ancient Israel was concerned, as you were when you were in the presence of the Ark of the Covenant. So when David saw them bringing the Ark of the Covenant, it looked as if the presence of God was leaving the city and going with David. But the implications of that were a bit overwhelming for David. In fact, David said to Zadok, "Take the Ark of God back to the city. If I find favour in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it, the Ark in his dwelling place." God's will, not mine. This is the lesson. This is why we need to study the saints that have gone before us. David lost his world, but he did not lose his confidence in God. David's entire world is upside down, but he doesn't lose his faith in God. Absalom shows up at the city, and he takes the city without a fight, but it's a hollow victory because he has the capital, but he doesn't have the crown. And the only way for him to proclaim himself the non-disputed king is for his father to be dead. And now, if the story couldn't get even more exciting, in walks another character in the story. And his name is Ahithophel. Now, Ahithophel was probably Bathsheba's grandfather, and Ahithophel was one of David's trusted advisors. But Ahithophel changes sides when he realises that Absalom's probably going to be the next king. And when Absalom shows up, Ahithophel is there to welcome him and to say, "I'm here to be your advisor, just as I advised your father all of these years. I'm here to do whatever I can to help you." And Absalom says to Ahithophel, "What should I do? What should I do next?" And Ahithophel gives Absalom this advice: "Do not rest here. You need to get the men that you have and pursue your father immediately. Don't let him get organised. Don't let him gather more people around him. He's tired. And that they left in a hurry and they're not ready and they haven't set up any kind of defence. If you go now, you can catch him. And when you catch him, you can kill him. And once he's gone, all of these people who left the city with him will follow you back into the city and you will be the king of Israel." But there was another counsellor there as well, and his name was Hushai. Now Hushai had actually left the city with David. And when David realised that Ahithophel was still in the city, he said to Hushai, Hushai, I want you to go back to the city and I want you to greet Absalom. And I want you to pretend to be a good advisor to him as well. And I want you to try and frustrate the plans of Ahithophel. Because Ahithophel will give him good advice and I need you to give him bad advice. So Hushai goes back to the palace, and when Absalom met Hushai as they were coming into the palace, he said to him, You've heard Ahithophel's advice to me. What do you recommend? And Hushai said, The advice that Ahithophel has given is not good. That was bad advice. Let me tell you what you ought to do. Absalom, think about it. You know your father and his men. They are fighters. He may be 61, but do not be fooled by his age. He is still a fighter. And he and his men are as fierce as wild bears robbed of their cubs. Take your time, consolidate, gather a large army and wait. And once you gather all the tribes to yourself, then you can personally lead this campaign to overthrow your father. And Absalom thought that was great advice. And Ahithophel knew that the end was near. He knew that if David is given time to organise and gather an army, there's no way he could be defeated in open combat. And you know what Ahithophel did? He went home and he hung himself. David, in the meantime, goes to a city you probably have never heard of called Mahanaim. And he hears that Absalom is coming. And he realised that he has no choice but defend himself and defend the people who are with him. So David does a very smart thing. David divides his army up into thirds and he puts a different commander over each of the thirds, and then he gives them these very, very explicit instructions so that all the troops can hear. When you catch up with Absalom's army and when you catch up with Absalom, be gentle with the young man, Absalom, for my sake. I realise this is a war. I realise it's going to be chaotic, but if there's any way to spare my son's life, I want you to spare his life. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of the commanders. So everybody knew. If you find Absalom, you take Absalom alive and you bring him to David. David's generals insist that David not join them in battle, so he stays on the wall of the city and he watches his soldiers march out to confront his son in battle. Now the text tells us that this battle did not take place on an open plain, but it actually took place in the forest of Ephraim. This meant that superior numbers meant nothing. Experience and organisation and communication mattered more. And fortunately, David was wise enough. We don't know if David's men drew them into the forest. We don't know why the battle was in the forest, but David's men were better organised to fight under those conditions because he had 3 commanders, whereas Absalom's troops were all looking to him for leadership. The text says this: There Israel troops were routed by David's men, and the casualties that day were great. 20,000 men died. The battle spread out over the entire countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. Many men were injured or taken out of the battle because of the fact they were fighting in this forest. Eventually, Absalom is caught, and instead of being held prisoner and taken back to David, Joab butchers him as the army is watching. And once Absalom was taken out of action, once people knew he was dead, his army immediately stopped fighting and they threw down their weapons. And the text says they all just went home. David is told that Absalom is dead and he mourns the loss of his son. In fact, he mourns the loss of his son to such a degree that the soldiers are afraid to celebrate their victory. Joab goes to David and he says, David, what's wrong with you? The way you're mourning your son, it's like your men think they lost. The men feel as if you wish they had died and your son had lived. So get over this and get on out there and celebrate the victory that just gave you back your kingdom. But it was a hollow victory for David because he loved his son Absalom. And he returns to Jerusalem as the king, but his world would never ever be the same. And 9 years later, he died at the age of 70. Now, it really speaks to the authenticity of this account that the biographers seem to have done nothing to hide from us all of David's faults and failures and flaws. And the thing that's so amazing, and the thing I want us to take away as we wrap up this narrative of David, is that with all of his flaws, he never lost his confidence in God. When things didn't go his way and it was somebody else's fault, when things didn't go his way and it was his own fault, with all of that, he never lost his confidence in God. That David's somewhat sad ending reminds us of something extraordinarily important. So if you've been daydreaming or thinking about something else, I really need you to listen to this next part, because this is the takeaway. Simply this: the foundation of all of our faith is not answered prayer. The foundation of faith is not everything going our way. The foundation of our faith is not happily ever after endings. In fact, it's always a mistake, even though we all tend to do this. It's always a mistake to wrap our faith in God around the fulfillment of our dreams, or even the answers to our prayers. It is always a mistake to wrap our confidence in God around the fulfillment of our dreams. My dreams came true, God is good. My dreams didn't come true, I don't think there's a God. It's always a mistake to wrap our faith and wrap our confidence in God around our dreams coming true, or even the answers to prayer, because dreams that don't come true and prayers that don't get answered say nothing about the presence or the goodness or the faithfulness of God. They say nothing about God's presence or his lack of activity. That when circumstances don't go our way, when our dreams can't come true, to assume from circumstances that God is not real or God is not present, David would say no. Don't make that mistake, because through all the highs and lows and through all the ups and downs, God was with me. And we would do well with our own circumstances and our own broken hearts and our own anger and our own dreams that can't or won't come true, to join David in this extraordinary statement that he makes when he's leaving the city. All hope is gone. He doesn't know if he will ever see the city again. He doesn't know if he will ever be restored. He doesn't know what's going to happen in this season of his life. But to join in when he makes this incredible statement: if I find favour in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him. In other words, not my will, thy will. Thy will, not my will. I know how I want things to turn out. I know how I want things to go. I know how I've prayed they go. I thought for sure they would go this way, but not my will. Thy will be done. I may lose my world, but I will not lose my confidence or my faith in God. I choose not to abandon him, even when it appears that God has abandoned me. And that's why, in spite of what happens around us, we are invited, because it is God who invites us, who sent us his Son to die for us. We can say with confidence, not my will, God, your will be done. And follow the example of David. No one ever promised you an easy, comfortable life as a Christian. What we have is a means to get through and still live it to the full and grow in maturity, and put all the lessons that we learn along the way to good use and share them with our fellow Christians and people who don't believe. And I invite you to live that life, to invite Jesus into your heart, to say, God, I want to follow King David's example and put my faith in you all day long. Come into my life and make it better. I can't do it on my own. I'm sorry for thinking that I thought I could, but now come into my life and let your will be done. And if you want to know more about following Jesus, then do get in touch. We'd love to help you on your next steps, or introduce you to Alpha and help you live a more fulfilling life. I hope that's been helpful. I hope you've been blessed by what we've been doing in this series of David. I've loved working on it and sharing it with you, and I hope that it blesses you and gives you food for thought as you take the next steps in your spiritual journey, in your growing in relationship with Jesus. So before I go, let me just pray. Lord, I thank you for all that you did in David's life, and I thank you for those historians who wrote it down, that we may learn from it. That we can learn that you are always with us. We are not forsaken. And we thank you for Jesus, who came and showed us the way back to you, to be fully restored, that we may live life in all its fullness. So come, Lord, come into our lives. Fill us with the Holy Spirit, that we may go on and live the life that you have destined for us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Tracy. That was a challenge, wasn't it? Not my will, but your will, God, be done. I think that's a big challenge for us to, well, for me to hear anyway. So thank you to Tracy for that. And sometimes when we hear something that people have been speaking to us about, the people that are speaking to us have prayed about their words. And they've thought about those words and want God to speak through their words. So if anything has jumped out at you from perhaps the sermon or what's been said in the service, please grab me and catch me outside to chat, and I'm happy to do that. But also, if you want to contact us at Hope Church, oswestry.org.uk/connect as well, you can contact us there, and we'd love to hear from you. And here at church, we're a mixed bunch of people, aren't we? Yeah, we are. We're a real mixed bunch, and we have a lot of different interests, and we have a lot of different lives going on. And one of our interesting people that we have in our church is Ivan, and Ivan's here this morning. But Ivan, we're going to watch a video about Ivan now, and it's about his new job role. And when I watched this video, I found it really encouraging and inspiring, and I hope that you do too. So thank you to Ivan for doing this video for us. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ivan Neira, and many of you know me as I have been with my family serving at Hope for the last 20 years. Last year, I began a new ministry with Friends International, a mission agency that seeks to reach and befriend international students that come to university here in the UK and Ireland. But for some of them, coming to the UK is not as easy as it appears. As Friends International, we want to work with the church, in partnership with the church, in the 40 towns and cities where we are currently working. My role as Regional Development Director for the Northern Region involves connecting with cities where the population of international students reach 20,000, Coventry, 15,000 international students, Liverpool, Manchester, and other places like that. And I support the local workers, the local staff workers, and link with churches and leaders in those regions. But also I'm looking at areas where we don't have currently workers. Your prayers for what we're doing would be appreciated. It's not just befriending for the sake of befriend, but to give us the opportunity to introduce them to our best friend, Jesus. We believe that by reaching one student, we can reach the nations. Just like Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. We can make a big difference by reaching those who come to our country for further education, that they may meet the one that can transform their life forever. Thank you for praying with us.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. And holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy and holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. And I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken, and I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are, and fill me with your heart, and lead me in your love to those around me. Those around me. And I'm laying down my life. I'm giving up control. I'm never looking back, and I surrender all. I'm living for your glory on the earth. This passion in my heart, this stirring in my soul, to see the nations bow, for all the world to know I'm living for your glory on sake of the world, burn like a fire in me. Light a flame in my soul for every eye to see. For the sake of the world, burn like fire in me. For every knee to bow down, for every heart to believe, for every voice to cry out, burn like a fire in me. For every tongue to confess, you alone are the King, you are the hope of the earth, burn like fire in me. For every knee to bow down, for every heart to believe, for every voice to cry out, burn like fire in me. For every tongue to confess, you alone are the King, you are the hope of the earth, burn like fire in me. For the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me. Light a flame in my soul for every eye to see. For the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me.
So for the sake of this world, burn like a fire in me. They're really powerful words, aren't they? Really powerful words. And this morning, it's been lovely spending time with each other again, isn't it? Really lovely. And again, I'll say if any of the words of the songs, any of the words that have been spoken have spoken to anybody, please chat to us. Please get in touch with us and talk those through if you need to. And a big thank you to Ivan, and remember to keep Ivan in your prayers in his role. And again, I'm sure he will be around at the end outside, will Ivan? If anybody wants to ask him any more questions about his new role or give him any words of encouragement, that'd be really great as well. Like I say, usually we don't just meet on a Sunday, do we? Our interesting band of people don't just meet on a Sunday. We join together throughout the week, and you can connect with us throughout the week. You can, on all our social media sites that have just come up, on Facebook, on Instagram. If you search on any of those sites, if you search Hope Search Oswestry, you will find us. So please get in touch. And we have a really active online community as well on our Facebook group, and that's lovely to be involved in that. And if you want to be involved in that, just search that as well, and you can join together with us. We also connect through giving, through financial giving. And if you're interested in that and you're in the room with me this morning, there's baskets on the tables there. And also the card machines should be working, so you can just give that a little tap as well. But if you're watching us online or you're watching later in the week, you can get in touch, hopechurchoswestry.org.uk/give, and you can go to there and you can give a one-off gift or set up a standing order if you want to connect with us financially as well. And also we are trying to try and connect with each other more physically together, aren't we? Physically. I'm just going to invite Joe up to come and give us a bit of information of what's going to happen.
Okay, so yes, we are trying to organise a Hope Church picnic. So we are in the process of organising a big Hope Church picnic for us to all gather, those of us at home, those of us here in the building. And that is penciled in for the 11th of July. Now, we all know, though, that Boris is hopefully going to be giving us an announcement tomorrow that will help us to know what is going on in the future. So that date is subject to change, but we're really hoping and praying that we can gather together as a whole church for a picnic at the Quinta at 1 p.m. on Sunday, the 11th of July. So there will be a save the date going out. We might wait until see what Boris says tomorrow, but I just wanted to give you a heads up, just so that you know that we are trying, because we want us all to be together soon, especially before the summer holidays and things start to change again. So yeah, 11th of July, keep the date in your diaries and we'll let you know, we'll keep you posted. Thank you.
Look forward to that. Picnic, that sounds lovely, doesn't it? I love a good picnic. And I obviously love getting together with everybody, all of you as well, not just the picnic. So my prayer as we end our time together, I want to read a poem. And this poem is about, I really like this poem, and I've read it to us before, and it's just my prayer for you this week. And in this poem, it talks about a thread that goes throughout all of our lives. And when I read this poem, that thread to me is Jesus, is God. So I'm going to read that poem to you just as we bring our service to a close this morning. And it's this. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. But nothing you can do can stop time's unfolding, but never let go of the thread. So amen. So may this week you have a good week. May you ponder the idea of your hopes after lockdown and how Jesus plays a part in those hopes for you after lockdown. So that just leaves me to say have a good week and enjoy the sunshine. Lovely to see you. So if you just wait in your seats for a moment for the stewards to come and escort you out, and feel free to stay.